what is the sort of core idea behind IdeaMarket, and what it is that you're hoping to solve.
Sure. So as you mentioned, IdeaMarket aims to replace the arbiter of credibility function typically played by media corporations very poorly with a public marketplace. So in the same way that markets are used to allocate scarce resources like natural resources and commodities and stocks, they can be used to allocate public attention as well. And given the way that markets are this sort of leaderless mediation mechanism between groups with disparate interests, we're going to have groups with different propagandistic interests, different ideological interests. It seems like a reasonable way to solve the same problem. Markets in general have a history of being a relatively efficient and universally accepted approach to solving this problem. But there's a really specific reason that I wanted to use markets to do it beyond those reasons. And that is, in the internet age, access to the world's best information is no longer a problem. It's not a problem of who has it. There's not really a difference in accessibility between the most obvious, loudest, most authoritative looking information, like CNN, New York Times, whatever, and the best information in the world. These tend to be two completely different categories, and it's not even close. But the ease of access is pretty much the same. We have the world's best information lying around on the table like an object, and we're generally not picking it up. We generally don't have mechanisms for the whole world to benefit from the world's best knowledge. So what we have is not an access problem, it's not a knowledge problem, it's not a discovery problem, it's a curiosity problem. It's that we don't have mechanisms for making people want to seek out this world's best information because there's not really an infrastructure for it. There's not really a reward for it. In fact, our social status hierarchies are set up to punish people who do that and call them conspiracy theorists and crackpots and things like that. So IdeaMarket is intended to create financial incentives for people to go and pursue this undervalued knowledge in the same way that it could be very financially rewarding to pursue other undervalued things in markets. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. One of the questions that I had about sort of the underlying hypothesis here is, what do you think is different about the way that ideas have been traditionally propagated? You mentioned, for example, the news media, that makes it so that certain ideas are essentially improperly priced.
Sure. So epistemology for the public generally hasn't changed in thousands of years. We've always had some authority who was in charge of adjudicating or deciding what that knowledge was, and then sort of enforcing it on the public. And if you disagreed too much, you would get kicked out of that public. I don't know a lot about the history of pre-Christian epistemology in a political sense or anything like that, but you get a sense that the church, as it gained power, became this monolithic authority, and if you disagreed, like Galileo or whatever, you're just like kicked out. You're basically deplatformed. And if you, that's probably the best case scenario. You might also be burned as a heretic or something like that. It's basically follows the model of obtain certainty, which does not exist, by the way. So every obtaining of certainty is fabricated, it's fake. Manufacture certainty, pretend you have certainty, and then enforce it on the public. That's been the two steps. And that continues all the way till now. The scientific revolutionaries who formed science in the 1700s and 1800s in particular were a bit of a deviation from this, in that they systematically were kind of rebellious, but even the history of science is a history of rebellious people. It's not a history of consensus. And now science has been so successful that it's been given the similar sort of monolithic power that the church used to have. And so now, of course, it's used by power in similar ways to establish a consensus, to fake certainty and then enforce it on everyone else. We're seeing the same exact sort of knowledge propagation mechanisms that have existed throughout all of human history. And with the internet, and especially with crypto, we don't have to use that model anymore. And not only do we not have to, but we never can again, because everyone in the public now has far too much ability to do their own research and to find social support for their own views and to go deep into details on things, to need to trust centralized authorities as much as they have in the past. There's just too much decentralization of knowledge power now. There's no going back. The door has been blown open on that model of epistemology. So we need a new way of getting people to agree on things. So a market has a function of allowing everyone's opinions to be heard and registered in a certain way, while moderating it sort of naturally, in the sense that when you're a market participant, good bets tend to pay better than bad bets. So careful thinking tends to pay better than worse thinking. So it sort of naturally encourages better thinking and discourages worse thinking, without having someone sitting at the top going, this is fake, this is real, this is fake, this is real, like we've had for thousands of years. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?